That's good. I could use my teacher voice, though, but I won't. So it gives me a great pleasure today to introduce Partha Narasimhan. Yep. All right, I'm trying my best. So Chief Technology Officer at Aruba, and Aruba is a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise company. But it hasn't always been that way. So he has been with Aruba since the inception of the company in 2002. At Aruba, he has led wireless product development and engineering, and later became the CTO for enterprise networking. Since the acquisition by HP, he has been the CTO for the networking organization within Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, also known as HPE. He currently leads a team that is responsible for technology vision and strategy for networking, spanning both campus and data center networks, which is really relevant for us. He has worked on multiple networking technologies throughout his career, following a PhD from Rutgers University. He has participated in standardization processes at the IEEE, and for those who are electrical engineers, this will be more meaningful than it is to me as a chemical engineer, but 802-11 and the IETF. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now. All right, perfect. Okay, so thanks again for the opportunity to present to all of you. I was thinking about what I should talk about, and I was in New York in November, where I was meeting. We had an informal dinner with about a dozen or so customers, right? And I've been with Aruba since 2002. It's not very often, in the Valley at least, to work in the same place for as long as I have. So there was always interest amongst one person actually asked me, "You've been at Aruba since the beginning. What still keeps you here?" And so I was trying to formulate thoughts and how I answered the question. And some of what I'm going to present is, why is my job more interesting now than it was in 2002? Although I'll tell you, the first 2 years in a startup, it's very hard to recreate it or replicate it. You have to go to another startup to recreate that thing, because it's very wild, very chaotic. You have the chance to actually make changes in direction, because you still don't have, you make lots of changes in directions in the first 2 years, right? And it is, every day you come in, somebody has a new idea, and we say, okay, let's go figure out how to do it. And sometimes it causes a change in direction. So if that is true, then it's very hard to recreate it. But I look back at the journey that we've had. It's been an amazing journey. I mean, like every startup, it is more of a roller coaster, although it gets a little more stable with time, in there. So I was looking at it and said, okay, how did I answer the question, and why is my job more interesting in there? And for those of you that don't know Aruba is, again, started in 2002. When we started, we were looking at taking what is essentially consumer technology. We started out looking at how to take essentially what is consumer technology over to an enterprise adoption. In enterprise, if you look at consumer technology, right, even today, when it comes to Wi-Fi, all of us have potentially a single router at home, versus a campus network like this one. You probably have like 3,000, 4,000 of those all around. And the other analogy that we use is, think about the transition that we all did. And many of you are very young. I tell people that when I talk to millennials, they think that the world has always been wireless, right? It wasn't so. Like, I can assure you that there was a time where we had to be tethered, especially even the telephones. You look at telephones transitioning from a wired telephone over to cordless phones, and the difference between what it takes to enable a cordless phone to work at home within the confines of your home versus what it takes to get a mobile network going, where you could be anywhere and still stay connected to the internet, right? So that is the transition that we had to make for the Wi-Fi world, right? What was essentially at home the equivalent of a cordless phone technology, how do you transition it over into what is a mobile network today? Like, as we walk around campus, you're still staying connected to the network, and how do we make that happen? And then 3 years ago, 2015, we became a part of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. That gave us a more comprehensive portfolio, including the wired technologies and so on. So, but the one thing that we have, the one reason, in addition to all of the technology differentiation that we can get, one of the pieces of feedback we consistently get from customers is a culture that we have in how we engage with our customers, right? And you kind of summarize it with these 4 words here: customer first, customer last. It has multiple meanings inside of Aruba, where some of us kind of think about it as from the time we wake up to the time we go back to bed. You think about how can you make an impact on customers, on what is essentially their lives and their livelihood. That is one. And the other way to think about it is we want to minimize the distance between the people that build our products and the people that use our products, right? And if there's layers in there, how do we shrink it so that those that are building our products actually have a pretty good view of the needs and the expectations of those that use our products in there, right? So that those are different ways to think about it. And this is one of the reasons why Aruba has been successful, is the focus on delivering customer value in there. And going back to answering that question from the customer on what is still keeping me here at Aruba, I mean, a lot of it falls under this trend that we see which we call digital disruption. Right? Think about how we used to do things a few years ago to how we do today. I mean, the classic example, the easiest one to think about is Uber, right? And how we used to look at the experience of getting a cab and riding it and reaching our destination to what it is done today. But that digital disruption has happened in many other industries as well, many other verticals. A lot of it comes from, we first discover those in our personal lives, and then you get into the office, into the college campus, into a hospital, and your expectations continue, right, as to how how the existing experiences in each of these places have to start to fit your expectations, which have moved because of what has happened in your personal lives in there. And a lot of it happens because of the digital disruption. And some of the factors that cause this disruption is, one of them is cloud. You look at 20 years ago, the cloud used to mean things that we find in the sky. And these days it means, essentially a different thing in here. The availability and the convenience of rolling out applications in the cloud, and has completely triggered a whole host of startups that have been able to innovate in a way that would have been very difficult 20 years ago, right? And so the cloud and the applications migrating over to the cloud, that's an important factor in there. And that's one of the reasons in there. The second one being mobility. And think of the smartphone. Like 12 years ago when Apple introduced the iPhone, and since then all of the advances that have happened in our lives and the impact it has had on our lives. Being mobile essentially means that you're not connected, and as you move around, how do you now consume these applications that are being delivered from the cloud? And these two are major trends that have had an impact in causing the entire digital disruption that we see all around us, right? And what it does, these trends, they bring the physical and the digital world together. And you think of the smartphone. And the smartphone essentially is not tethered, right? I mean, I joke that I don't have my backpack here today, but I do carry an Ethernet cable in my backpack, just to remind myself that I once had to use it and I know what to do with it. But I have 3 devices with me. Nothing has an Ethernet port. I can't plug anything in. And then 2 years ago, we moved into this new building. Aruba moved into a new building in Santa Clara. And all of the ports on the other side went away too. So the cable essentially is I have nothing to connect on either side in there. So the mobility means that you are going to move around and stay connected to the services that you care about and to the internet essentially. But moving around also means that if I'm able to sense your location of your device and then tie it back to you as a user, then we start to get a view into the physical world, right? Because I know where you are now, and I know what you're interested in doing, and now I can bring the two together, right? Essentially, all of the apps basically stay in the digital domain, and how do I now bridge the gap between the two? So the cloud makes it easy for me to create and deliver apps and services And the fact that we consume all of those on our mobile devices mean that you are basically creating disruptions that bring the two worlds together in there. And let's look at some of the examples of these disruptions, right? I mean, they happen across all of these different verticals. Look at stores. And the classic example, I don't have it. I mean, this, as you can tell, this slide is a little old. If you look at what Amazon is trying to do with Amazon Go, basically the experience is all modifying to where you walk into a store, you pick up the things that you want to do, and you walk out. There is no checkout line, and there is no payment that you have to fumble around with credit cards and so on. It's not that different than the Uber experience, right? Think about, you request a ride in the app, you say where you want to go. The app already knows where you are, and somebody comes up, they pick you up, and they take you to your destination, and you just walk out. Right? It's a very similar experience that Amazon is trying to create in their stores. There's not that many of them. There's one in Seattle and so on. But in order for that to happen, essentially you have to bring together context, right? The store needs to know who you are, tie you back into your digital persona in terms of the account and other things that you've created over there. They need to know what are the items that you've picked up. And so there's a lot of sensors that are in the store that make it all possible so that you don't have to express your intent. The store figures out your intent and can quickly make sure that they charge you in there. So that is an example of something that they're still trying to create. It is early in the process, but it's it's a different experience than what we are used to today. Right? You go to a store, you put things in your basket. Nobody knows what you've done until you go to the checkout line, and then they scan barcodes in there. Right? None of that needs to happen in the Amazon store here. Look at hotels, and even though we say hotels, what somebody like Airbnb has done to the way we think about going and staying at a place as we travel. Right? And it's the same experience that, again, they borrowed on Uber, where there is a notion of your digital persona and things that live in the digital domain as you search for different places that you want to pick on that side. But there is also the physical world, because you are looking for some place to stay in a physical world, and as you get there, how do I make it easy for you to check in, check out? All of it happens within the experience of the smartphone in there, right? Many times, we've stayed at Airbnb many times here in the past few years, and sometimes you don't even meet a person in there, right? You just walk in, and once you're done, you go out, and all of the communication, the instructions, and the engagement happens through your smartphone, through the app. So that's an example of the disruption that's happening to the hotel industry. Workplaces again, are going through a transformation, largely driven by expectations of a younger generation like you, and a few people that are slightly older than you, where for enterprises or for organizations like us, including and many of our customers, it is important to fit the workplace to fit into how their future employees think about the environment that they want to come in and get their work done at. And a lot of that migrates towards making it easy, for users to do the things the way they want to get done, right? Let me give you an example. In the first 3 or 4 years at Aruba, again going back to the 2002-2006 timeframe, there was a lot of focus around these things called rogue access points, right? And the rogue access points, the definition is that there's an access point that a user brings in and deploys in an enterprise environment or in a college campus environment, and it suddenly there are multiple things that are a problem with that, right? It is now creating signals in the wireless domain that could interfere with other signals from the college campus network or the enterprise network. They also create pathways, security vulnerabilities, and creating pathways that are not compliant with the policy that you want to set. So there was a lot of focus on detecting these and providing visibility to people that run the network so that they can track them down and shut them down in there, right? In fact, at Aruba, we used to have this saying that we sometimes tell our customers that if you don't deploy Wi-Fi, your employees will. Because that's what essentially the rogue access point is, right? Somebody is saying it's very convenient for me at home. The work doesn't have it, the office doesn't have it. Let me bring it in and plug it in, and bring that convenience with me. So as organizations started deploying Wi-Fi, the whole notion of rogue access points went away. Right? For many years, we never heard about them, and because most people say, okay, why bother? Because the campus network or the office network is good enough for me to do it. In 2018, I spoke to a few customers that talked about why it's coming back. They are all started to spot, these access points that they didn't deploy, but they are there in the office. And and you go around and you try and figure out why and try to understand why. Why did it come up? There was a 10-year period where nothing happened, and now suddenly they're starting to show up all over the place. And you get to understand that it's because it's not that the connectivity and the bandwidth and the speeds are not there. It is that the network is not allowing me to do the things the way I want to get done. Right? Think about, I found a new app that is making a big impact in how I manage my schedule during the day. And I come into the office or the campus, and that app is not allowed on this network. And so why don't I bring in my own network and allow that app to work where I want it to work? So if that is the trend that we're looking at, then all of the organizations, all of your future employers are all thinking about, okay, how do I make sure that we understand what our employees want, what our end users want, and provide it, create an environment where we can make that happen instead of everybody creating their own environments and getting into a chaotic environment, right? So the workplace itself is transforming in that sense. And again, mobility is an important aspect, right? And most people don't want to. I mean, even if you wanted to connect to the network, we don't have the ability to do that anymore. Schools are, I've always had a deep interaction with our higher education customers. I actually think many of the interesting problems start to show up in this environment first, right? And think about higher education. Every college campus, every year you take a quarter of your students and they leave, and you replace them with an equivalent number that are 4 years younger. So even as we are all getting older, your user population stays the same age, right? And they're all coming in without any inhibitions. They haven't been programmed to say, okay, you are not going to do these set of things in there. I mean, I go look at my own IT people at Aruba or HPE. We have a lot of rules and saying these are things that are not allowed and these are things that are allowed. But the incoming freshman class especially are coming in with no such inhibitions in there, right? So they come in and try various things in there, and a lot of interesting problems tend to show up here first before they show up at a Microsoft or at a Google. So we've always had our engagement with many of our higher education customers because I want to know, okay, what's going to show up at Microsoft 4 years from now, right? The good place to start is over here. And they're all going through. And the other example we use is, we've always had this term that we call bring your own device, right? The iPad, for a lot of the enterprises, started the trend where users wanted to bring their personal device and wanted to get their work done. But you look at a college campus, you've always been bring your own device in there. Right? And so those are trends that, again, start to show up over here. Schools are transforming, again, to think about things like Coursera and what they're trying to do in adding and augmenting what you learn on a campus network, and how do you continue learning even after you move out of the campus, gotten your degrees and gotten in there and so on. So a lot of disruption is also happening over here in terms of how the future of education itself is starting to look like. Factories are another one. We have a customer here at Tesla, whose factories, there's a lot of automation going on in there. There's a lot of use of robots in getting the cars manufactured in there, right? And which means that, again, robots are a highly mobile set of things in there. Sometimes, they do move around, and many of the factories are getting to, these just-in-time inventory. I don't want to stock a lot of inventory all over the place in there, and as I'm making a car, the components that have to go into the car arrive just in time so that they're not waiting around getting cluttered in around where the car is getting assembled in there, right? So that requires a lot of coordination and a movement of all these objects and tracking them and so on. So a lot of use of technology, including mobile technologies and wireless technologies in the factories that again is changing the nature of how factories are thought about going forward in there, right? So the disruption is not restricted to any of these. I didn't even talk about hospitals, for example, right? That's another important one. If you look at a hospital, it's a very mobile environment. Doctors, nurses moving around everywhere, patients getting moved from one place to another. In fact, every time I go to a hospital, I feel an immense sense of responsibility in there because there are things that we do. There is life and death, right? If I don't deliver your email in timely manner and it's late by a second, okay, so what? You may not even know. You may not even notice. But you don't do that at a hospital. That's a big life and death situation over there. So there's a lot of use of technologies in hospitals as well, right? So what does this all mean? And we are starting to use this term inside of Aruba as well, right? So there was a time where IT, teams used to be measured, especially if I look at networking as an example, we used to be measured based on performance, based on speeds that we deliver, based on uptime, how available is the network, right? Does it ever go down and does it ever cause disruption in here? But the newer metric by which everybody is getting measured these days, all of your IT teams, all of your networking teams, is how well they're delivering on end user experience, right? Because if you look at all of the disruptions that we talked about over here, the one common thing in all of these, startups is all about delivering a superior experience in an existing, problem area, right? Uber, what it did, in Airbnb, what it did. It's not that they're suddenly changing, okay, you don't have to go travel or stay somewhere else, but when you travel, can I deliver a significantly superior experience as part of that process in there, right? So that is really what is causing, these are small examples, samples of what is out there, but all of these successful companies are looking at the reason why they're successful is they're taking an existing experience that we have and making it an order of magnitude better, right? And that's what's going to drive, and that is factoring back into a lot of the things that our customers do as Aruba customers, right? The networking teams that we engage with. They are in the process of delivering a better experience. So if they're going to be measured by experience, how do we even know how well we're doing, right? Because you don't want to poll a user twice a day on saying, okay, how good is your connectivity experience? Because that polling mechanism itself will start to impede with the kind of data that you're going to get in there. So you got to find other ways of looking at how well you're doing because the metric is no longer an objective metric. I can't show my boss that, okay, look, I've never had a single failure in the whole month in here. But now the metric is, okay, that doesn't matter. How satisfied are your users? And how do we now answer that question? So we are starting to look at it as the ongoing thing is we're all going to shift towards thinking about delivering a better experience because that is truly the metric that we're going to get measured against. And if you look at it, somebody did a case study on, you see the coffee bean, and I'm sure you're hoping that somehow it'll come up with this one here. You look at the process of making coffee in here, right? And on the left over here, the people that make the beans, that grow the plant and get the beans and make them in there, in a cup of coffee, their contribution to the whole thing is about 2 cents, right? And the amount of revenue that they get out of every cup of coffee that we all consume is about 2 cents in there. And then somebody takes those coffee beans, roasts them, grinds them, packages them in cans, and ships them to your grocery store. So you can walk up to Safeway or wherever you shop, pick up that, that can, go home, make your own cup of coffee, right? And the contribution of the people that do that, they get about 10 cents for every cup of coffee that we drink. And somebody else says, okay, I can actually make the cup of coffee for you. So you go to a diner, for example, right? And they bring you a pot of coffee, keep it on your table. They get to make about $1.50 for that cup of coffee that you drink in here. So that's an example of somebody, okay, here you're growing your own beans, and many of us don't have that luxury, but we do have the ability to go pick up about coffee from our grocery store and make it ourselves, and that's what it'll cost. But you can go consume it as a ready-made product, right? That's a service that you can actually consume over there. And then you go all the way out here to the right, and you look at Starbucks, and I don't know, this must have been old, because I don't know who pays just $2.75 for their cup of coffee at Starbucks, right? It's well past $3. But you look at why are they able to, command more than $3 for their cup of coffee is all about the experience that they're trying to create, right? It's not just about the coffee. Yes, ultimately you're going to Starbucks and you'll get a cup of coffee, but the whole experience of getting it, consuming it, maybe sitting out there and getting free Wi-Fi and so on, all of that is the reason why they are up there, right? So the focus, as we look at within Aruba, we have the same scale out there, right? We don't make these commodities, but think of all of the chips that go into the products that we make. I mean, we don't make those chips, but that's the equivalent of a commodity, and you're buying all of those components and you assemble the products that we do. But basically, we were out here saying, okay, we are out here to sell you a product. We sell products to our customers. We expect them to assemble it, put it together, and run it. So that's the equivalent of us giving you ground coffee and ready for you to go make it yourselves. And we are slowly transitioning over to this side of the world where other customers are asking us, saying, why would you want to sell me gear and let me operate it? Do you want to operate it and let me consume it as a service? Right? So we are in the process of making this transition over to this side of the world. But the real value that you can deliver to customers is over here, right? This is where you see that there's increased value, but that also causes a customer to, take a sacrifice and give you, part with more of their money to you, is because you're able to deliver a superior experience. So as we start to think about this is where our future is, right? This is one of the reasons why, I believe that my job now is far more important, because we're not thinking about networking. We're not thinking about moving, bits and bytes from one side to the other. Yes, those are important. That's a foundation on which everything is built. But you're now talking about making an impact on end users and their experiences in the physical world, using the network infrastructure that we build out and the knowledge that we gain from what users are doing and what they're expecting to do, and how I can deliver that to them in a superior fashion, right? So as you move more to the right, the value that you're going to deliver to your customers increases dramatically. And we think about it as, internally we think about it as smart digital experiences, and how we can, how the network infrastructure can be a window into understanding not just users and their expectations, but also the physical space that we all reside in, right? We all, whether it's a place that I work at, whether it's a place that I go to learn, or whether it's a place I go to shop, or I travel and in there I go to get healthcare. Everywhere there is expectations of certain experiences that we all have. I mean, we all have different personas in there, right? And during a weekend when I'm at a store, I am a shopper, but I'm also, during the weekday, I'm out as an employee at an office, or when I travel, I could be out here as a resident at a hotel. So we all have personas and expectations that are tied to those personas. How do we think about improving or enhancing the experiences, or creating new ones that are not possible today? And that's where the value is. And this impacts, again, we think about it as four segments of users that we want to impact. End users are always, is the most obvious one that we want to make an impact to. The line of business is becoming important, especially you look at your own campus network in here. If you wanted to know how users are distributed across the campus, right, we can actually poll the network at whatever frequency you want and essentially give you 1-minute samples of where all of the users are. And we've seen interesting patterns come out of it in there, right? So that is interesting to people that want to understand how space is being utilized, and is there different ways of reconfiguring it that, again, help deliver a better experience in there. Ultimately, people have to still deploy infrastructure and run them, right? And how do we create a better operator experience for them in there? And that's something in there. And the last one, it says CISO. It stands for, Chief Information and Security Officer. as we do all of these things, and especially if you look at end users in the line of business and so on, there's lots of things that are getting added to our network in there. They used to be separated out, and look around campus, you might see security cameras, you might see thermostats, you might see many things. Some of you might have Wi-Fi light bulbs in your, either at home or in your dorm rooms. So many of these devices, as they come in, they don't necessarily, have not historically had the same amount of focus in terms of security, as opposed to some of the infrastructure that the IT folks are used to deploying, and they are opening up certain attack surfaces in there, right? Every month you read this news about somebody whose network was broken into, and sometimes you go deeper in there. The number of instances where somebody broke into using some device that didn't belong to any user, but that is in there as part of delivering that experience, it gets a scary world. So we're also looking at, as these devices are necessary to create those experiences, how do we do it in a secure manner in there? So I want to, this is the last slide I have, or there's one more after this, which you look at these market transitions. Market transitions create opportunities, right? Not just in terms of business opportunities, but also technology opportunities, right? New problems that show up, new ways of thinking about them, new tools that have to be developed in solving them in there, right? And you look at this world, this is where I got started with my compute experience in there on a mainframe. It was largely everything was centralized, and I got started actually on punch cards, right? You write your program on punch cards, you submit them, and sometimes a few hours later it comes back and says, oh, you missed a comma, right? So that's the world. It takes a while to get things done in there. Then we went over to where the PCs became interesting, but it was a client-server model, right? The servers had a lot of applications, but a lot of the applications also started showing up on our devices, right? Primarily PCs in that world. So it moved from a centralized paradigm to more of a distributed paradigm, where compute got distributed all over the place. And now you go back to where you look at the smartphone and the cloud that is associated with it. A lot of our apps are actually anchored in the cloud, and the smartphone is a way of interacting with the apps in there, right? So we're again back into the centralized world, and we actually believe the pendulum will swing very soon, right? The edge is where we all live, and the data center is a very dense environment. That's where our apps and data lives, but there are no humans out there. And the edge is where a lot of the activity is. The classic example of why we'll come back to more of a distributed world, think about the self-driving car. And think about the car sensing that there is something out right in front of it. All of that sensor data has to get processed locally, and the action needs to happen locally. You got to hit the brakes or whatever needs to happen. You can't take it back into the cloud and wait for a command to come back saying hit the brakes. It might be too late in there, right? So that's an example of where something has to happen because it's very sensitive that you act quickly. But there are analysts that believe that 75% of the new data that's going to get generated in the next 5 years will never see a data center or the cloud, will get processed locally in there, right? So in some sense, the pendulum is going to swing again, and it'll swing again going backwards in there, and we still don't know how yet. But all of these transitions create opportunities, right? Whether new tools and techniques that we have to do. Look at the whole transition to the cloud and the kinds of tools and techniques that it ended up creating. So that's what it is. We are in the middle of this transition, and all of you are in a good place because you're entering the workforce at a point where paradigm is going to shift and the world is going to get more interesting again, right? And we find ourselves in a good place over there. Well, when I say device level, well, yes, the car, if you consider the car as a device, yes. But even a college campus like this one, for example, they could be, we went through a phase where this period where, a lot of the compute and the storage moved out of the buildings into a centralized data center, and the data center moved out to the cloud. Some of that compute will come back not as compute and storage, but as services that I have to deliver, for which I need to get that data processed locally in there, right? So yes, you will see that it's not just at a device level, but it is closer to the edge. And by edge, we don't mean the devices at the edge, but the edge is a collection of locations where people are, right? Whether it's me, where I go to work, where I go to learn, where I go to get healthcare, where I go to shop, and so on. All of these places will start to get compute in there. And I want to finish with one thing that, again, this week, I think we celebrated Rosa Parks Day, right? As part of being at Aruba, starting from the beginning, I have been to many, many interesting places, right? A few examples. I actually have sat outside Larry Page's office and was troubleshooting some connectivity issues that he had. And if you don't know who Larry Page is, he's started Google. One of the two guys that started Google. This was at a time in 2003 when Google was still just a search engine, right? You look at, I once went to an American Airlines hangar in Oklahoma to, again, troubleshoot some Wi-Fi problem, but that got taken care of in half an hour. And they said, okay, you have another 3 hours, come on over, let me show you a tour. So I've gone under the belly, one of the compartments on the underbelly of an aircraft, and there's a mini data center out there. The kind of equipment, I was surprised, okay, you guys have this much stuff on an aircraft, right? So, or the experience that I've had at New York Mercantile Exchange, right? There was a trading floor that we were in, where we spent a lot of energy in designing a network that went under the floor, where we deployed all these access points under the floor. We spent months designing and validating the design. We spent, after the equipment got installed, we spent 6 weeks testing it and validating, and it was ready for in there. We flipped the switch on a Monday morning. The traders came in at 9 a.m. and at 9:05 the network just died, right? And I had this experience of angry traders, yelling at me that they're losing money. And I'm saying, the more you yell at me, the longer it's going to take me to fix the problem, right? Go away. So, that was, again, an experience. It was something that, as part of being at Aruba and being at all these different places, including, I remember a distribution center at Safeway, somewhere in Tracy, where we were way up there, and these have tall ceilings, and we were way up there on a platform, and then on another ladder saying, I was telling these guys, there is some radio up there on the ceiling, and we couldn't see anything. But that is causing interference out here, right? And go figure it out. And all the people that had deployed the access points are all, they didn't know who had deployed what radios, but that's, again, another interesting experience. We were way up there, went up on a lift on a platform, and then another ladder out there. I was holding my laptop all the way up there and saying, this is where it is. But we couldn't visually see anything. I don't know what happened. We had to leave that day. But there is one other interesting place that I went to recently that had no Aruba equipment in there. And this was it. For those of you some of you might recognize this, but this is the bus that Rosa Parks actually sat in. This is the very vehicle. And this is sitting in Detroit, outside Detroit in the Ford Museum. Right, growing up in Aruba, and growing up in India, I wish I had grown up in Aruba. I've never been there. Growing up in India, you read about the civil rights movement at some level of detail, but I had no idea who Rosa Parks was until I came here for graduate school, right? And in fact, if you showed me a group picture that she's in, I will not be able to identify her. So I don't even know what she looks like. But walking into this bus and sitting in the very seat that she sat in, it created a big impression on me, right? And I walked away thinking, why? And there are three things in here. The lessons that I learned, and I'll tell you what it is and take it for what it is worth, right? And a few things: seize the moment. Right? It's important to do it, and the trouble is, you never know which moments are going to be important. So you got to seize every one of them that shows up. Right? This is the opposite of what they teach you in baseball, right? Where you don't necessarily swing at every ball, but in life you got to swing at every ball. It's okay to swing and miss, but you got to seize the moment. And you got to seize every moment because you don't know what's going to make it big. Anything, even a small event, can make a huge impact. So don't think about it as, okay, it's just a little thing and what's a big deal. You never know, right? I don't think Rosa Parks was sitting out there and thinking that, okay, I'm going to say no and it's going to cause this huge thing, and 5 years later we're going to end up with civil rights laws in there. You never know. And so you got to be prepared and however little thing in there, you got to go do it, right? Because it could have an impact on your life. And the third one, it's not, all these big changes in history, you look at it, they all happen with people that, that you would never have heard about them until they did something there, right? So it's not that we need some big people with long years of experience like me to come in and tell you what to do, right? Many of us already know what it is. And so when you're in that moment, don't think about the fact that, I am just a little person here. It doesn't matter. You may never know, right? You might end up causing a big impact in there. Right? So that is, to me, this is one of the, significant places that I've been to. There is no network equipment inside that bus. And yet, it left a big impression on me there, right? So that is, my advice to you. Just thank you.
All right, so we have time for some questions. So if there are folks who have some questions of our speaker. I have a question. Okay. So my question has to do with thinking about how you studied your engineering or your other technical subjects and then trying to translate that to being prepared for the user experience approach, because I feel that our engineering curriculum is really driven on a performance thing. We really drive the technology, and there's not a lot of opportunities until maybe you're a senior in your final year and you can do maybe a capstone project where you actually do interface with the customer, but a lot of times you just get told what to do, you get the specs, and then you go. We were just having a discussion about that this morning. I mean, what could students do to help prepare for this?
Yeah, the one thing, looking back at my own education, in India, there's a lot of focus on academics and, especially as you get into the engineering schools, we don't do a lot of classes on things outside of the core engineering that we do, right? And it is a difficult journey from there to go. The one thing that I have benefited greatly from is the customer interaction. Right? When you go talk to customers, I remember vividly this experience that I had, and many customers, you can think of, yes, Microsoft network has this problem, right? Microsoft is a very abstract entity. But the moment you go interact with the people that run the team, it becomes Patrick's problem. It's no longer Microsoft's problem, right? And that kind of a engagement was very important for me to a point where, without it, I could be sitting in my cube, and I have asked this question: why does anybody want to do this way, right? But until you go talk to the people that are asking for you to solve a certain problem in a very specific way, you don't get a understanding of what it is. So that whole experience, ultimately you're trying to create an experience or making a difference on somebody else's lives, and you've got to now understand them better, right? And I think the colleges are getting better. As I look at my son is a senior at University of Illinois, and look at some of his classes in there. There is a healthy mix of all the things that he does as part of his computer science program, but there is a healthy mix of other things in addition as well, right? So that I think is important, right? Because as technologists, and we were talking about it before the talk, that the pace at which technology is moving today is actually accelerating, right? And it's actually going to get faster. If you thought this was, somebody had this saying, right, that today is the slowest day of your life, and the slowest you'll ever be in the future, but the fastest you've ever been in the past, and that is true. And if that is true, humans' ability to absorb this change actually is somewhat limited, and we have to find ways to bias ourselves right, so that even as we go create these advances in technology, we're able to absorb them right and do the right thing. I mean, we're not going to. The laws and the regulations are not going to help us. I mean, in my own experience, they're far behind the pace at which technology is going. I mean, just think of the need, the arguments about the need to regulate Facebook, right? I mean, Facebook has already been out there, and we are now starting to think about, oh my God, do I need to think about whether I need to regulate it or not? So, introducing that early in the educational journey of many of the future technologists is an important aspect.
All right, great answer. Yeah, we have more questions. I'm gonna be the one with the mic. I've got comfortable shoes. It's good.
Hi, my name is Axel, and I'm currently a senior at Computer Engineering Department. I want to ask about like back then in 2002, Aruba is just a startup. Um, you don't know what's the future. I mean, like a lot of startup in Bay Area, and then like a lot of successful startup, but there's more um, failed startup. What makes you think you? What make you join Aruba, and why don't you go to the other big company that has already established?
So I started my career at a big company at NEC. So I have been there, and I was somewhat um, frustrated at the change, at the pace of change, and my ability to make a big impact in the change. Right. So somewhere along the way, I said, okay, let me go look at the startup thing, because there was always this perception that startups are risky until you realize that no, they're not. They're not any more risky than big companies these days. Right? There is an element of risk at every single startup, but statistically, they're no riskier than any of the large companies. I have been through many startups that didn't make it, and not because some because we didn't necessarily have the right technology, but many others that did not, in spite of the fact that we had serious technology differentiation. So technology is an important ingredient. It's necessary, not sufficient. Right? You got to find a real problem that the technology has to solve, and a real way in which to deliver that. And that's why going back to the experience is an important way of thinking about it. A way in which you can deliver it to customers, and a way in which they can consume it easily. And you got to think about the whole cycle in there. So why did I join Aruba? So I'd already been in 4 startups that didn't necessarily make it by the time. So I took my time. I knew, even as I was looking for a dissertation topic in the early 90s, that after talking to an electrical engineering professor, I walked away realizing that the world was going to go wireless, right? The, yes, the wired speeds are going to be an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude faster, but there's one thing that that the human mind needs, which is to be untethered, that the wired technologies can never deliver, right? So it took a while, but we're here, right? The world has gone all wireless. And so that was a bet that I saw the Aruba founders make, and it was a good fit for my own mindset at that time. But a lot of the success that we've had at Aruba, now I work in a big company. You look at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, it's about 50,000 people. Although the day Aruba got acquired by HPE, they were 325,000 people. And we were looking at, we were about 1,800 people, and said, what are we doing now, right? But the big companies, yes, things are slow. I mean, even at Aruba, I've seen us slow down, mostly because if you have 80,000 customers, you can't randomly change direction in there, right? You got to be thoughtful about it, but at the same time, you don't want to slow down to a point where there's another startup that's going to come in and disrupt you. So you got to find that right balance, and we've been lucky enough to find that balance in there. And as long as you're able to do that, right, the problems that you're working on is interesting, is viable, it makes an impact on people's lives, and you have the culture and the environment in the company you're working at to continue to make that impact, then I don't see a reason to go anywhere.
All right, other questions? We have time for one more. Yeah.
So since HP acquired Aruba, have you seen the customer support model changes in terms of like selling and supporting them?
Sorry, repeat the last part again.
Have you seen changes in terms of supporting the customers with being with HP as is the mother company in the back?
Yeah, good question. So in that sense, we've been actually fortunate, right? Anytime you're acquired by a big company, there's any number of reasons why those kinds of things happen. But when Aruba got acquired, we were largely successful and very dominant on the wireless side of the world. HP had an internal division called HP Networking that was successful on the wired side of the world. So the way we did the acquisition was we took the old HP Networking and the old Aruba, put the two together and said, this is the new Aruba. And mostly the goal was to leave us alone and say, you guys know what you're doing, continue doing what you're doing. And that has remained the same in there. So to a large extent, the acquisition actually helped us, right? I'll give you an example. Aruba was about slightly under $1 billion in annual revenue at the time, in 2015, early 2015. We are past 3 billion now, right? So, in some sense, the acquisition has helped us grow for a couple of reasons. One, large customers that had global presence did not want to trust us, even though we had superior technology, whether we'll be able to support them, globally, right? And now, with the weight of HP behind us, that problem went away. So we started winning at the higher end. But HP also had a good, process to go address the smaller end of the market, right? Look at it as a startup, you got to pick your battles. You got to pick saying, this is a segment. I have a high-end sales force. They're going to go attack this segment of the market, which, the customers excluded us from the top end. The sales motion that we had, the process excluded us from the bottom end. So HP filled the gap at this end too, right? So it took the strength that we had in here, but extended it on both sides of the market. So that has helped us grow. And the fact that they gave us the charter and the autonomy to continue doing what we're doing was very helpful. So we've benefited from it, from being part of HPE, rather than many other stories where you get acquired and in about a year people leave. And the fact that many of us from Aruba are still here is, we have to be thankful to Meg Whitman, who when she acquired us gave us that commitment, and to this day it's still there.
All right, so I think with that, let's thank the speaker.